In this video, I'll dive into fun, chilling and surprising facts that make these Grandmasters, Ultra Bosses and locations overpowered and still flawed, with tips for getting the current run of GMs done faster. You can also quickly unlock that Conqueror title for yourself. All this info comes from spending way too much time playing Destiny and also deep diving lore facts that I will guarantee you have not come across before.
Let's go.
First up, we meet the Guardian Butcher of the Red War, and the Cabal we face down at the end of the newest Grandmaster Nightfall, coming into rotation in January 2025. Commander Dracus. This is one nasty commander that doesn't know loyalty, doesn't understand respect, and is a stain on the honour of Empress Keitel's right of proving. Serving as a legionary during the Red War under Dominus Gaul, he became known as a butcher for the numerous count of lightless guardians he had maliciously taken out during the war effort. After Gaul's defeat, Dracus went onwards to create a name for himself and became known amongst the Red Legion's remnants as a warlord, achieving for himself the rank of commander. Stationed on Nessus in the aftermath, he regularly went on hunts for the timid native Batactals in the area to provide entertainment and some sport for him and the Cabal under him. We encounter him as he's stationed defending the Imperial land tank Helphus Electus in Watcher's Grave as it chews up the planet's landscape, refining resources for Cabal weapons and armor. In-game Behemoth was originally released as a battleground during the Season of the Chosen and has been retrofitted with champions to fit into the format of Grandmaster. Dracus is the final boss at the end of this Grandmaster and is a large legionary who is supported by waves of Cabal reinforcements. His primary method of attack is a heavily modified Cabal slug shotgun, which fires arc damage at an incredible fire rate and range right in front of the large land tank. For bosses and the main boss fight itself, I'd recommend a stun lock trick using Vantage Point or Noxious Vetiver with Jolted Feedback perk, and using Trace Evidence and Retinal Burn seasonal artifact mods with maybe arc compounding thrown in for blinding. Using these and hitting crit spots repeatedly with these weapons suggested will keep stun locking champs and bosses, making your life and the GM run itself much easier and faster to complete. Have a go, let me know how you found it as a solution. Phyris is a hollowed out shell of what she once was. A revered sharpshooter of House Salvation and close personal friend of Aramis, she was reincarnated as a scorn by the Witness. As a general in the servants of the Witness, Phyris was presented to Aramis as a gift by the Witness and left Aramis shocked by what now was Once-Phyris. A zombie in every effect and not a trace of her once friend. Horrified by what had become of her friend, Aramis reached out and grazed the monstrosity's face, hoping to find any sign of the Elixni she once was. This only prompted her to bite the ship stealer's arm, who was glad that it gave her a reason to scream aside from anguish. She would now be known as Once-Phyris, the Exhumed Tether, the powerful Scorn Raider and lost captain of the fallen House of Salvation. She was deployed in the assault on the lunar vault housing the submined Malahati, where she was used as a tether between it and the high forces of Xivu Arath, trying to corrupt it. Season of the Seraph introduced us, in-game, to Malahati as a submind of the Warmind Rasputin, one of the vast machine intelligences built during the Golden Age. But many hundreds of years earlier, it was Malahati who was called upon by a Cloud Strider to purge all mention of Neptune or the Exodus Indigo from Rasputin's archives, hiding Neomuna from all until recently. The main boss that we meet at the core of the submine spawns in huge waves of enemies at a 10% health drain. It's super easy to be overwhelmed if your fire team drains much of the boss's health at the start. The approach should be slow here so that you can have enough time to clear small groups throughout the fight. A decent choke point can be the extreme right corner of the room from the entrance. Before the rework, The arms dealer was one of the faster strikes to do, similar to Lake of Shadows. You're able to take down the big boss Bracus while you were making your way up the elevator with rockets and supers. Speedrunning strikes were just plain fun and relaxing. Now, we have a beefy, passively shielded Bracus Zahn in the GM version, who is the arrogant mercenary arms dealer of the Red Legion. The GM version definitely slows down gameplay, adding barrier and unstoppable champs into the mix at most points. The run is pretty straightforward, with 5 main areas and the toughest area being the final airspace, where you face off against Zahn. Enemy density is fine, just keeping an eye on those Thresher warbeasts and regularly popping up turrets while tapping away at his power bar takes a little care, but all very doable. Maybe use a safe space at the very right of the airfield behind the main tower that Zahn flies to halfway through the encounter. But be careful, Zahn sniping at you can take you out pretty quickly and cause you to wipe the encounter. Zahn himself, as an infamous arms dealer, was the most loyal to whomever was paying for him and his experimental weaponry. And also, his preference was to employ criminals and mercenaries since he understood their motivations. While the new version of the GM uses the same name, it may be just a pretender who wanted to usurp the legacy of the name of the original Bracus Zahn. Even though he looks exactly the same and uses the same behaviours as the original model of Zahn. What's been interesting to think about in lore is what Zahn Ra, the descendant of Zahn, would have thought about the Cabal who started to call himself Zahn as a title, as that name cast shame on her and her bloodline to this very day. Zahn Ra was one of those who worked with the Vanguard to make the pyramid scale inspired Sparrow Unified theory, which was dedicated to the memory of Amanda Holliday. Nessus is a near completely converted machine world. The Vex were at over 90% completion rate at turning the entire planet into a prediction engine. They previously converted Mercury and Io independently in mere days to convert them to Vex constructs. The addition of the new Heist modifier that imposes excessive damage on Guardians after a mere 3 seconds of non-sprinting makes gameplay even more tough in the hardest mode of the game, and it does feel a little excessive. In my head, GMs are where you sit back and strategize your approach from well thought out loadouts for the entirety of the run to key save points to assign in areas so you have options to use. Heist does up the ante and especially makes the newest GM a very thinking on your feet exercise. Protheon itself has some key tells that makes higher DPS easier. During each of the phases, Protheon glows a different color, reflecting its weapons, elemental damage, and the stage effects. But make sure you have some arc resistant mods on for his weapon type, and if you are to take a run in the Radiolarian Lakes in this GM, careful. There have been a few Guardians that thought it's a good idea to drink Radiolaria, which would be drinking microscopic organisms suspended in a white, milky fluid. This, in effect, is actual Vex, not their metal shell. Examples of Guardians who drank Vex milk include Caber, the Legionless, who drank from an oracle and transformed into a Vex, and Ashermere, who was kidnapped by another Vex mind, Brachion, at the shores of a Radiolarian lake. It tortured Asher and his team with experiments injecting Radiolaria and grafting Vex technology, some of which converted the latter's arm and his ghost into Vex constructs before he could escape. The Harmony spent 50 years waging war with the Hive. It would be a war they could never win, but it was during that time they turned to the unpredictable power of Dragon Wishes as a weapon to use against the aggressors. The Ascendant Realm housed the great battles that saw the Wish Bishops tear through Xivu Arath's forces, and for a time, stalemate was met. This might be the first encounter that we know of that the forces of the Witness encountered the Ahamkara and their abilities aligned with the power of the Traveller, as the Harmony were. This is as good as any theory as to why the Ahamkara were part of the strike of Liminality, intermingled with the memory of the Precursor People's City, that we also encounter in the latter half of this mission. The main mechanics of this Grandmaster lay in empowering the Ahamkara bones with taken energy, which is a nice touch even if there's no mention of how this works in any lore that I've read, and even less on the main Tormentor in the boss room, Kataxiia, Tormentor of the Ahamkara, who also has a crit spot on their back, so you and your teammates can pop away while you run away from the aggro Nezarec clone. The original mission from the final shape was inspired by Indiana Jones type adventures and the 1930s pulp novels, and the word liminality is defined as the current state of a rite of passage that a subject is in the process of undertaking. Set in the Pale Heart, we encounter a manifestation of a long-lost city from the precursor civilization of the Witness for the first time, deeply buried within a mountain. This isn't the first time we have warred in a mindscape, and probably won't be the last. Guardians first encountered a mindscape when they faced the exiled Cabal Emperor Callus in his throne room on the Leviathan, also called his Nightmare Realm. The Emperor created this space by connecting with the psychic concert of his counselors and used it to torture and detain his foes. In our first encounter within the derelict Leviathan, in the orbit of the moon, Eris Morn would find a large concentration of psychic energy, and setting up a containment field, she managed to project a Guardian fire team into it, so that they could glean knowledge of Callus's plans from his fractured mind. Season the Risen saw the return of the Mindscape as the powerful Scions dragged a weakened Ulnath Light Cleanser, the Hive Lightbearer Knight Lieutenant, who ran an operation to stockpile and purify light for the Lucent Brood. Into this space, we could sever their connection to the light, but leave them in suspended animation for further psychic analysis. Imperial Opti, as a class of Scions, granted strong psychic powers under the command of Empress Keitel, who worked with the Guardians for these Psyop missions. The only trick of this encounter can be the boss Mindscape Arena, but if you retreat up to the platform you spawned in on, it will keep you safe from most of the activity. It might look like it doesn't provide a lot of protection, but you're far enough away from most enemies that they won't even bother shooting at you. From here, you can damage the boss until he goes immune and teleports away, at which point aspects of Savathun will spawn in, and you can easily handle the rest. Since the rise of the Witch Queen campaign, the most irritating introduction of an element to the game has to be Lucent Moths, especially if you jump into the Lost Sector in the Pale Heart that is infested with kamikaze moths determined to take you out. But what you might not know is that Lucent Moths are a byproduct of the existence of Lightbearer Hive. The Hive react to the light in their bodies as an infection, causing disease-like symptoms such as headaches, mood swings, and insomnia, and generates an immune response that attempts to isolate it into cysts. However, the light itself ends up organizing and transforming the encysted light and hive biomass into a wholly new and separate organism, more energy than biology, which eventually hatches from the cyst and attempts to protect its hosts in the form of Lucent Moths. Birthplace of the Vile is located within Harvest, in Savathun's throne world. You face off against the Scorn, who are looting the worm factory that Rolk built to try and combine Scorn and Worm Embryo, but didn't get that far. It's actually a pretty quick GM run, and I have teammates who ran it under 10 minutes. Just remember that tackling Heimiks, Warden of the Harvest, who is the Scorn final boss, don't forget to pay attention to them, as its stomp mechanic can easily catch you off guard. The boss itself is easy, because it has 3 phases, and after each phase it simply just teleports you to another location where you need to get to the portal and run back. Also remember, take out the champions who teleport in at the beginning of every DPS phase, and get that platinum check at the end. What is kept hidden and away from most eyes of casual and even seasoned Destiny 2 players are how absolutely cracked some of the living weapons in the game are for endgame content, and just generally to play with. In the video coming up next, I go into god level ultra bosses trapped in weapons, some AI weapons that help us evaluate others, and some guardians living inside weapons hoping to enact revenge on the species that trapped them there in the first place. All this coming up next. Check it out.
Wow, this has just been such a pleasure. I'm such a lucky boy. I can't wait to go home and